This episode is sponsored by Nucleus Security. Nucleus is a security management and workflow tool that aggregates and correlates data from anywhere, making it actionable for the teams that need it, when they need it, fast. Know your risk with global, project, and asset level views that provide visibility across all teams and data streams. Make better decisions faster with dashboards, drill downs, and reports that are robust, shareable, and flexible. And save hours and dollars with workflows for automating repetitive, time-consuming tasks. You should check these guys out at nucleussec.com. That's nucleussec.com.
You're listening to the Barcode Podcast with your host, Chris Glandon, serving cybersecurity straight up with no chaser. Let's hit the bar and grab a drink.
Hey, Tony. Wow, what's up with the breathalyzer?
Oh, hey, Chris. You haven't seen that yet? It's our new vulnerability management system. We're testing it out.
Oh, yeah? How does that work?
So, you breathe into this device. It'll detect traces of alcohol in your breath and gives me an estimate of your blood alcohol content. Based on those levels, if the device shows your BAC over the legal limit, gotta flag you. Basically, we're just trying to reduce hazardous conditions, control the chaos.
I hear that. Keep the peace, brother. Oh, by the way, I noticed this sick black Ferrari in your parking spot outside.
Oh, yeah, you like that? That's mine.
What? Really? Man, Barcode is hooking you up then.
Business is good. What can I say?
Well, good for you, man. You got to let me go check that out sometime.
Man, you ain't ready for that, are you?
You crazy. Hey, I'm meeting up with a friend of mine here to talk about a serious cybersecurity issue, so I need to grab a drink. Something built for speed and accuracy, just like that new car you're driving. So you got any ideas?
Oh, yeah, no doubt. Give me 1 second. I've scanned through all my top shelf inventory for you. And I think I got the perfect drink for you. The Gin Rickey. See, you're going to fill this highball glass right here full of ice. Add 2 ounces of gin. Half ounce of freshly squeezed lime juice. Top it with some club soda. Once you unify all of those sources, you see how clear it is? That's what I call full visibility, baby.
Nice. Yeah, I'll take that, man. Well, I got to run. I'll check in with you later tonight.
Well, I'm actually off for the rest of the night, bro. I'm late for singles bingo.
Always on the prowl.
Oh, yes, sir. You never know what's out there unless you look for it.
True statement. Well, good luck, man.
See you next round.
The vulnerability management lifecycle is a cybersecurity practice that helps strengthen an organization's readiness to anticipate and handle attacks. At its core, a vulnerability is a weakness or flaw. A flaw that could potentially enable a cyber attacker to access a critical system. Although the practice of vulnerability management is in fact an intricate process that many organizations continue to struggle with. So today at the bar, I'm with Scott Kuffer, co-founder and COO of Nucleus Security. Scott is an expert in vulnerability management and workflow optimization. I'm very much looking forward to enjoying a good drink, all while discussing this critical pillar of cybersecurity. Scott, welcome to the Barcode, my friend.
Hey, man, good to see you.
Well, it's good to have you on, man. Let's talk a little vulnerability management.
Oh, that's my favorite topic, Chris. I'm like one of those boring dudes that I've been doing this my whole career. I never got out. I never got to do the fun stuff.
Vulnerability management can't be fun?
Well, I don't know, man. It can be if you're a nerd, but not if you're one of those cool HD more types that graduates to hacking stuff for real instead of just assessing. So I basically find that a lot of vulnerability management is just pointing and saying, hey, somebody like HD or the guys from Portswigger could probably do something with that. You might want to check it out.
Good point. So the term vulnerability management, it's an often misused term. Would you mind explaining vulnerability management in your perspective and why it's important for organizations to have a vulnerability management program?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So what I found in my career is that vulnerability management is a very amorphous term. Nobody really knows what, you could say that and ask 10 different people and they all have different descriptions of what vulnerability management means. And a lot of that has really stemmed from a lot of the early vulnerability scanning vendors just back in the day. I think because a lot of them had these dreams and high hopes of essentially managing the whole process, but they really turned into more of this vulnerability discovery phase of the VM lifecycle. And so what I find is that most people either conflate vulnerability management with either vulnerability scanning, or they conflate it with patch management, or this kind of third, more general term of sort of more of like a process management type thing. And what I find is that vulnerability management is really kind of a combination of everything. It's really this abstraction layer on top of all of the different tools that you're using, all of the processes you have in place, and all of the people that you have in your organization to try to actually reduce your risk in regards to vulnerabilities. And the management term is very important because it really comes down to trying to actually find and remediate and then track and report on all of that. And so what we find is that vulnerability management is actually a larger process that drives other processes within your organization. So you've got all of these different phases of the VM process, and vulnerability discovery is one piece, triage is another piece, analysis, prioritization, reporting, and all of that stuff. And so what we find is that really is the core of what vulnerability management is, but there's a lot of confusion in the market about that. And not just in the market, but just kind of in general. Everybody sort of has a different perspective on what that means.
Definitely. So when you talk about a solid vulnerability management program, how do you break that down? Does that stay with a security team? Do you involve other parts of the organization to help in that entire process? I assume that you need to get the buy-in from multiple lines of businesses to make that efficient.
Oh, yeah. That's actually, that's the biggest challenge of vulnerability management, I think, is essentially this cross-functional coordination across teams. You essentially have the vulnerability discovery phase is handled by one team, the assessment team, and you've obviously got a bunch of different tools that you're using for that. So you might be doing pen tests, you've got your network scanners, you've got your DAST, SAST, IAST, your SCAs, and your cloud, and all that fun stuff, generating a bunch of data. You've got your patch management team, which are trying to just run patches, and they're the ones actually fixing specific sets of vulnerabilities. You've got developers going and fixing a different set of vulnerabilities. You've got your sysadmins going and fixing up, and then, the process, right? It just continues horizontally scale that out. And so what we find is that you really need that buy-in at a higher level to do vulnerability management well. And so I think that's probably one of the biggest failings that we see is one team of those ends up getting to take responsibility for that. And so they get the blame for other teams not doing their job, and they have to try to find a way to exert some sort of internal pressure, whether that's through positive carrot reinforcement or through the bloody stick model, and trying to get people to actually patch stuff or to fix vulnerabilities and to do it over the long term. So yeah, it's honestly probably the biggest challenge and the real good basis for a strong vulnerability management program. We find, I like to call it the PowerPoint method because I like to live on the edge and hope I don't get sued by Microsoft. So the PowerPoint method is the people, processes, and technology. And we like to do that in that order. You need people that can define the processes, and then you use your technology to kind of wrap the whole thing up and enable your process.
As someone who has developed vulnerability management programs in the past, I've experienced several pain points myself. For example, understanding that vulnerability scanner isn't enough. And being able to ingest vulnerabilities from various sources is crucial as well, because vulnerabilities can surface in many different mediums. And you need a place to be able to centrally track those vulnerabilities. Is that something that you have seen? And also, where should organizations be collecting vulnerability data from?
Yeah, so that's really an interesting question because, I mean, if you just go back and look at your even your interview with HD a few weeks ago or a few episodes ago, I mean, he was getting questions about whether or not vulnerabilities exist on the assets, and HD's had to himself try to exert some pressure against his clients to essentially focus on what he wants to focus on, which is that asset inventory, which is another critical security control. And by the way, you need to do asset inventory well to do vulnerability management well. So shout out to Rumble and HD. He's doing a great job over there with that. Oh, and we have a Rumble integration with Nucleus, by the way. Quick shout out. Had to do it. But so yeah, what we generally see is that there is absolutely a need to aggregate. And most of the clients that we see, and not even clients, I mean, just all of the people that we work with and organizations that we work with. I mean, I come from a background of doing this with enterprises and government and, MSSPs. And what we find is that there's a need to aggregate data just in general. And a lot of these organizations are building this internally. Maybe they're, spending, they've got a 12-person development team trying to maintain and just stitch together different SQL scripts and Python scripts and just to try to make it work. A lot of people are trying to build this over a SIM, like a Splunk, and trying to build some sort of workflows off of that. And sometimes we see people trying to dump everything into Jira. And so we find that there's just this huge need to aggregate all of this data. And there's no really good way to do it. And all of it is a huge pain, if you don't mind me saying. So it just requires a lot of effort to do. And the thing that we find is that in order to get real value out of these types of tools and solutions, you really need to do a lot of different things well. It's great that you can aggregate data. That's cool. But now you want to be able to do something with it. So now you need to expose it via API, or you need to be able to take that data and put it into a SIM so you can, or some sort of SOAR platform so you can do something with it. Maybe you want somebody to be able to report on it and you want to slice it in different ways. And so there's so many different needs for this data because there's so many, I go back to people and processes. There's so many different teams that are involved. They all need the data, but they need it in different ways and they need it for different purposes. But it all kind of drives back to that data source. And just enterprises in general love their business intelligence tools. So they're always going to try to consolidate and build links between things. They're just not doing a good job of it.
Historically, the consumption of scam results, analysis, ticketing, and remediation tasks has either been manually done or it's been very involved. Is this a trend that you've noticed as well? And if so, why and what do you think is the bottleneck here? Is it the technology? Is it the process? Is it something else?
Oh man, yeah, you hit the nail. Kind of, you're opening a can of worms on this one. And I've got, we've got lots of thoughts as to why this is, but yes, it's an extremely manual process right now. And the reason for that is that nothing really talks to each other, and the teams don't talk to each other, and the people have a hard time really communicating in a way that makes sense. But a big part of it too is there's just so much data that's being generated. I mean, if you look at even just a compliance framework that says you need to scan every week or every month, and you've got 50,000 IP addresses you're scanning, and you're trying to look at the tenable output of that, and you're trying to track that and upgrade or downgrade the severity and track those changes. Who's tracking those changes? And how do you make that persist over time? And how do you do that across all your tools, especially when you're starting to look at your DAST and SAST and other tools and drawing those parallels and correlations between the data, especially of different types, is very difficult. So even if you're looking at, there are certain other people that are building solutions, like in Splunk or whatever it is, where they're trying to say, okay, let us look at just the CVEs associated that are being generated from a scanner. And so we're going to try to correlate data between two different tools and then just look at CVEs. We're going to just break it down to the CVE, but that doesn't capture the whole picture. And then what do you do with manual results? And so what we find is that it's extremely manual. And no matter the joke that we have internally here at Nucleus is that no matter how many tools you have and no matter how much you've paid, you could have spent $100, you could have spent $100 million on vulnerability management tools, and you're still going to be using Excel at some point in the process to manage the actual data and to track the actual data over time. And so you have pivot tables. And so what we find is that Excel is actually the real hero for most organizations. And I would never call Excel a hero normally, but can be useful for small data sets, I guess.
I mean, Excel is powerful.
It absolutely is. But luckily I haven't had to use Visual Basic in like 5 or 7 years. So I'm count myself lucky, I guess.
You mentioned Splunk. So I'm steering over to the product integration side of things.
Sure.
With the advancement of solutions in the security stack now, organizations must understand how to optimize existing investments that may play into the vulnerability management lifecycle. What integration points within an organization's tech stack should be considered when developing or optimizing a vulnerability management program?
Yeah, I mean, this may be cliche to say, but everything. You want as much data as possible to try to make decisions, because I mean, if you have no visibility into what a tool set is generating, then you have no visibility in that section of your tech stack. So if you look at the reason that you have all these different tools is for the visibility aspect. And so, you may be scanning with an SCA tool to find Azure packages. You may be scanning the same set of code with a SAST tool, and then you might be even scanning the same application, but you're scanning it dynamically through injection testing. And then you also are scanning the host infrastructure that it's running on. And you also, maybe you're trying to figure out what those assets are. And so now you're running an asset inventory and discovery tool. And so the question is, what do we do with all this data? Because right now it's independent, and you can, again, like I said, build kind of your own custom correlation in Excel. A lot of people are using Excel for this, but the power, like the thing that people are, I think, probably recognize, but just haven't acted on, is the power of being able to correlate data from different sections of your tech stack and being able to say, we know that this piece of code is executing on this IP address, and we've done this dynamic scan, and it's an externally facing asset. And we know that it's externally facing because we've correlated from our asset inventory system. So you've got like an asset inventory system that then has metadata about the asset. And then we know that there's a piece of code running on that particular asset from the correlation of data. And then we can use a field in our asset inventory system to essentially automate some sort of task, or to start bringing that data together to do something with it. And that's how you can really start automating. I mean, if you look back at what you would normally do is, okay, I'm an analyst, I've got all this data in. Maybe there's even different teams of analysts depending on the type of data that is being generated. But what if you can start turning that on its head and saying, well, we know that this asset has this type of information associated with it. And then there's vulnerability data on that same asset that's being discovered somewhere else or by a different tool. But we know what's supposed to happen with vulnerabilities based on the asset data. And so just by bringing those together, you can then start to build some real logic around what do you want to have happen later on in the process. Maybe we want a ticket created. Maybe we want a report generated automatically to stakeholders. It doesn't really matter. The power is bringing all of that together. And doing that across the tech stack is something that just hasn't really been accomplished up to this point.
Yeah, great point. When you look at the SOAR platforms, I guess, right, that they really help augment this entire process.
Right. And they need to plug into at the right places, right? Is they need to be able to make sure that they're getting data from the right place, so they can augment the process that you're trying to run and automate, with data from elsewhere in the tech stack.
Got it. And when you look at ticketing systems like ServiceNow, that also helps bring in a level of accountability as well. Just being able to route tickets to the proper resolver just by understanding what the asset is or what the software is, correct?
Yep, absolutely. And so I know we're focusing a lot on the technology, but I want to take a moment to sort of just reframe it a little bit as how this drives the process. And so how the process drives the technology. And in a lot of places, it's a chicken and the egg situation, because you need to be able to define a process based on technology, but you also need to buy technology based on the process that you want to have defined. And because you need to understand what your end state is. And so one of the big failings that we see is that most organizations don't really know what the end state that they want is. They think, we want lower risk. Okay, well, what does that actually mean? That could mean a lot of things. That could mean, okay, we're going to turn all our computers off and have no risk. But it's understanding what that means in the context of your business, and then using that to drive your product and technology decisions. So for example, you're not just going to drop every single vulnerability that ever comes into a ticket in ServiceNow, because you're going to overwhelm your teams. Nobody's ever going to fix anything. And so you need to be smart about how you do this. And I'm gonna do a shameless plug here. But I do this one vulnerability management talk called Controlling the Chaos of Vulnerability Management, where we liken the whole process of vulnerability management to basically a giant dumpster fire, which I'm sure is no surprise to any of the listeners, but basically to just highlight how much of a dumpster fire it really is. And so the parallels that we draw is that you've got your firefighters, and those are the guys that are out there responding to the vulnerabilities and the threats in real time. New vulnerabilities get discovered, things happen. And so that's the cool job. That's the job everybody wants to do. And then on the side of the vulnerability management analyst, the preventative side, you get to be Smokey the Bear. And so you can either be Smokey the Bear or be a firefighter, and you need both in order to accomplish your goal. And so the technology often is driven by the firefighting side of the house of we need to fix stuff. And that's where the Jiras and the ServiceNows come in, is for that quote unquote accountability. But you don't have the process outlining and kind of abstracting away for the whole rest of it, which is that we want to prevent a breach in the first place. And we don't just want to fix vulnerabilities. We want to make sure we're fixing the right vulnerabilities. We want to make sure we're getting the visibility we need so that we can make decisions. So there's just a whole lot more to it.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. And it's funny that you say that you compare it to a fire. So you got to be able to see through the smoke too, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You got to see what's there.
Yeah, that's a good one. I might take that for the next webinar.
Not that good, man. I just came up with it. So let's talk a little bit about communication to leadership. That's a huge concern as well, especially when the need is obvious. So first, let's talk about justification. How can a security team or security analyst justify the spend to build out and enforce a programmatic approach to vulnerability management when maybe all they have is one scanner and they're pulling in vulnerabilities? How can they quantify the need and lay it down on the desk of a CISO or not even CISO, because the CISO may be on the same page, but other leadership that may have a hand in getting that program rolled out?
Oh, for sure. This is, I think, one of the toughest problems that we face in security, just in general. You have these increasing budgets, but they seem to be not for the things that are foundational. And so the question becomes, how do we illustrate to leadership and people that don't understand they're not technically savvy, right? You just look at the kind of the demographics of some of the leaders that are out there, and just small businesses. They're not focused on cybersecurity. They're focused on, making money, and that's their job. And so how do we translate essentially your cybersecurity risk or the amount of value or cost to leadership for rolling out things the proper way? And so that's a really tough sell. And so I know there's been a lot of a big push in the industry towards going towards the risk scoring and the risk-based vulnerability management scores. And I think that there's been some success with that. We're trying to boil it down to a very simple metric for executives to understand. But even in the grand scheme of things, like you look at vulnerability management, and that's one small piece of cybersecurity, which is one small piece of the business. And so getting them to understand and prioritize that above, say, patching or anything else is very difficult. And so what we find that actually really works well is essentially showing management how vulnerability management is a workflow process, and how you can actually enable better adoption of the tools that they already have and better value from the purchases they've already made. So if you've purchased Splunk and you've purchased Jira and you've purchased an asset inventory tool and you've purchased a vulnerability scanning tool, you're getting a small piece of value out of each of those. And then at the same time, you're getting a whole bunch of detriment for your teams because they're getting overwhelmed. And so if you could show them, hey, look, if we automate this process end to end programmatically, look at all of these things that we don't have to expand our team next year. We don't have to double in size because we have a whole bunch of vulnerability data coming in. We don't have to, spend all this time trying to figure out what to remediate. We can fix X amount faster. And then we can actually show you, because we'll have all of the data. We're measuring in the way that makes sense. And so we find that tends to be really, really powerful, especially when you combine it with the risk-based vulnerability management scoring, which executives love. So if you could show, we're going to drive that down. And at the same time, we're going to also reduce cost across our business and increase the speed at which we can basically remediate and fix more vulnerabilities. It's a win across the board. So that's generally the way that we see as the most valuable way to pitch it, rather than just trying to oversimplify it in a way. It's more translating it into a language that they'll understand.
Definitely. I see your angle there, and it could be saving the organization from a breach as well. And
absolutely,
that could go beyond comprehension.
Oh yeah. It's one of those things that we as cybersecurity vendors and providers like to harp on that though, right? It's, how many slide decks have the Equifax breach at the front of it. And so I try to encourage people to have more of the positive outlook, because cybersecurity really is seen as a kind of a draw on the business bank account. And so if we could start saying, hey, this is actually a positive thing, you're going to not only reduce your risk of a breach, but we're actually going to have all these other business impacts at the same time. We're going to reduce employee turnover because the job of vulnerability management doesn't suck quite so bad. You have all of these kind of peripheral benefits. And at the same time, maybe you sleep a little better at night. I don't know, but I don't want that to be the primary necessarily driver when you're trying to talk to a business owner. They just, a risk is risky or a breach is risky, but so is not making that big sale and working with the sales team. And so you just need to make sure that you're talking in their terms.
Definitely. So we talked about this a little bit earlier too, the cross-functional responsibility throughout the organization. And when you look at the VM process holistically, it's iterative. So you do have discovery, you have the assessment, prioritization, and you have the remediation, which often relies on other teams, whether it's sysadmins, app analysts, so on and so forth. From your viewpoint, how do organizations streamline these efforts for efficient remediation? And it could be contained within the organization. It could be reliant upon third-party vendors.
Yep.
What works in that situation?
Yeah. So this is very dependent on the organization and the team. And it really depends on the types of tools you're using. And it depends on how your processes were set up from the beginning. We see a lot of different ways that this happens within some big enterprises. What we'll see is that there will be a team that is specifically, they call it the cyber services team. And their job is to basically do vulnerability management for all of the subsidiaries of the business itself. So you might have big business, whatever, giant manufacturer, call them whatever, Toyota or whatever, right? And you've got all of your subsidiaries and your sub logos that you would also basically try to manage vulnerabilities for. And then there might be an MSSP that gets stood up inside the big enterprise that actually supports each of the individual little enterprises within, the big company. And so that's one method that we see is really, really effective when you get to a certain size. But that's basically making it similar to just outsourcing to a regular MSSP. And so if you find a good MSSP that can take care of all of that for you, that could be really helpful. But the problem with that is that you need to make sure that they have the level of access and that you trust them enough to do the full cycle. Because if you just plug them into one piece of the cycle, then you're going to be no better off than if you just hired somebody to do that for you. And so there's a lot that goes into this. There's a ton of research and whatnot on how to do this the right way.
You're also, correct me if I'm wrong, but relying upon that third party. So when I worked in healthcare, we worked with providers that may need to patch medical equipment. And, it could be legacy and there could be one person working in that organization. And I guess that comes down to having that tracking ability, whether, at that point you have to determine, are you going to move to another software vendor?
Right.
Those are things I think that having a vulnerability management program can bring to the surface as well.
It definitely can. Yeah, it brings a lot of things to light. I call it visibility, across the board. And that's the interesting part about this. And this, I think, is why I got so sucked into this from the beginning, is as it's so interesting in a lot of ways. And I know that, and I think a lot of the problems that surface in vulnerability management and in our industry come from the fact that, all of us are geeks and we want to do the new cool thing. And so what we find is that there's a lot of turnover in vulnerability management, and there's just not a lot of people that stay. And so people like me that stayed in vulnerability management from the beginning are kind of in the minority, actually. And because pen testing is way more fun. I've done my fair share of that as well. But I actually came back to vulnerability management. That's a whole other side story, how that happened. But so what we find is that it's a lot of more inexperienced members of our community that are kind of getting their start. And so they don't really, there's not a whole lot of innovation that happens in this foundational piece, because it's kind of like being a garbage man in a way. Like, it's a very necessary job. It's a really, really good job to have, but there's just not that many people that want to do it because it's boring and it is a lot, long hours. And then your head is on the line when something happens because you were supposed to prevent something. It's a very preventative style of career. And so when you don't prevent it, then you get in trouble from management. So it's an interesting position to be in, which has left this blend of kind of this gap where there's just a lack of innovation because everybody's innovating in other areas because everybody's moving through this industry so quick.
Yeah, I agree. I think the innovation comes with, figuring out ways to take that data and turn it to a positive. And speaking of innovation, let's talk about Nucleus for a minute. Would you mind going into sort of what Nucleus is, its inception, and also your role there?
Sure. I am the co-founder and chief operating officer of Nucleus Security, and we specialize in vulnerability management. Our entire co-founding team has done the job. We were inspired to do this job by the fact that our jobs were terrible, and we love automation. So we're lazy in a good way. And we really decided that there needed to be some innovation in this space, and we just couldn't believe that it didn't exist already. Nucleus is we call it unified vulnerability management. So we thought long and hard about how we could take the vulnerability management moniker and make it something that people understood, because we at first called ourselves vulnerability management, then we called ourselves vulnerability and risk management. And people always, they wanted to know if we were a scanner or like what our TCP traffic looked like. And I was like, no, that's not what we do. So basically what we do is we are a vulnerability aggregation, correlation, and workflow platform. And really the whole idea behind it was spawned out of myself and our other couple founders work with a few large organizations in both the private and public sectors. And we were doing vulnerability analysis. And there were all of these peripheral processes that we were involved with. And we were an MSSP for various organizations. And so we had to manage the whole process. We didn't have the luxury of a discovery team that ran our Qualys console and a patch management team. It was us doing all of it. And so we realized very quickly that there was actually a workflow problem where we have all these tools out there and there's no way to tie it together. So it's great that you have a Nessus, but you get a 16,000 page PDF report back in 2011, with 100 IPs that you're scanning. And so there was just no way to manage that data. And so really what Nucleus was spawned on the idea of is that we can start to automate this whole process. We started seeing that this is really just a big workflow that we can start to cherry pick out different things that we can do that we don't want to do, right? As an example, there's a user or a stakeholder that wants information on a specific set of vulnerabilities for a specific set of assets. I don't want to have to spend an hour or 2 hours a week putting that stupid Excel sheet or converting my Excel sheet to a PDF report together. So let me automate that. Let me have that emailed to them automatically. And so that was really the idea, is we built a wrapper around the vulnerability scanning tools and then grew it out from there. So to kind of circle back around, we take all your vulnerability data and asset data in your organization. We pull all of it together into a single location, into essentially a correlated data warehouse of your vulnerability data. And then we will actually, from that unified view, allow you to orchestrate the rest of the vulnerability management process. So whether you want to track and triage vulnerabilities, you can do that. You can do that either via the UI or interfacing directly with the data warehouse. You can go in and generate, obviously, all of your reporting that needs to happen. You can generate and interact with all of your ticketing systems, your SIMs, your SOARs, your Slacks. Your used to be HipChat. Sad day when that left. That was one of our first integrations. Shout out to HipChat. But the idea is really a lot of the things that I've been talking about this whole time, right? Is that we've got all this data out there, and it's overwhelming, and it's overwhelming our teams. But if we have it all correlated and together, we can do something with it. Number one, we get the benefits of visibility so that leadership can see exactly what's going on. And then as we started going down this path, we realized that, oh, wow, this is really cool. When we start to see data from one tool and we can correlate it to another tool, we can start to draw comparisons and correlations between different parts of the tech stack. So now I can start saying, let me look at my vulnerability data for a specific product suite and all of the infrastructure, all of the code, all of the containers and cloud and everything that's running in for that product suite. Let's do a report on that. Let's start bringing that together. And that gets really, really cool, because then once that's brought together, you can not just report on it. Now let's start automating some sort of response. We know who owns that product. We know who owns that code. So new vulnerability data comes in. Let's automatically have them fix it. Let's integrate to the CI/CD pipeline. And so we realized that there are all of these different actions you can take by having this correlated data together. And so it was really spawned out of that idea and us being the garbage men of vulnerability management within big enterprises that helped us see this.
No, I think it's an amazing thing what you guys have developed here. And I think it was much needed in the industry. Can you talk a little bit about your architecture? Are you guys a SaaS platform or on-prem, or do you offer a hybrid model?
Yeah, so we are actually a SaaS platform primarily. So we come from an interesting background, but for various reasons, we can deploy on-prem. We just don't advertise that because it's not our preferred deployment method. So we're primarily a SaaS business. But that being said, depending on the customer and the needs, so think giant financial organization that's international or somebody that doesn't trust the US people, we can deploy on-prem as well. But that's more of a custom deployment. So it's primarily SaaS. And the beauty of SaaS is that you get to push constant updates. You can do all of the iteration that's beautiful in the cloud. So we get all the added benefits of being able to do auto scaling and all of that. So we try to really push people towards SaaS because we can, Nucleus as a product can really fly. We love our performance because again, we don't want to have to spend a whole bunch of time waiting for stuff. So we really want to make sure that people get the performance that they want out of it.
I want to hit on ROI real quick. Determining ROI in security is difficult because it is about more than just revenue. How does Nucleus approach it?
Yeah, absolutely. So we divide that into two categories. We've got the quote unquote hard benefits, and then obviously the added soft benefits. And so as far as the hard benefits go, it's a really easy comparison to make because we can literally take a vulnerability analyst doing specific tasks and then say, how long does it take them to do this task? And then find out that you can do that in, it takes 2 hours or 5 hours for an analyst to do one task per every 1,000 assets. And then, and a good example of this would be just trying to figure out what changed between this scan and last scan on the same asset. So let's say it takes me 15 minutes or 20 minutes to do that for one asset in one scan. And then I want to try to chart that out for, 50 assets or 100 assets or 1,000 assets. How many man hours am I spending on that? And then, or we could just upload it to Nucleus and Nucleus will take care of that automatically and it happens instantly. And so it's very easy for us to basically look at it from that way. And so that's just one example. Obviously, we're built around automating as much of the different pieces of the process as possible. And so, you can basically look across the entire process and say, okay, we spend 2 hours a day building a pivot table. All right, that goes away. Okay, we spend, an hour a week just generating this report. And not only that is you've got all of the added kind of risk of having people do all this work, especially with huge mountains of data. So the other thing that's like kind of not talked about is you've got a lot of data that you're chunking through. And so you are having people manually review this. And so just the soft benefit of not having people that make mistakes a lot, reviewing the data and tracking what's changed is a really big benefit as well. But yeah, so it kind of goes into those two different categories. But yeah, it's pretty easy for us to show the hard ROI. The soft ROI is a little bit harder because we're trying to tell you what isn't happening, right? It's you're not getting breached or you're fixing 10 times more vulnerabilities than you were before. But it's like, what does that really mean? And so again, goes back to translating that to business risk and business decisions is kind of the other thing, because you're not going to fire people because you implement a Nucleus. It's enabling people to do other things. And so you're actually, it's kind of like a reduction in the future cost, not necessarily a reduction in the current cost.
Got it. Makes sense. Okay. I'm going to take a sip of my drink here.
Me too, man.
Right.
Me too.
What are you drinking there?
Jefferson Reserve.
Oh man.
Hey, it's what we had in our local bar in the office.
No, man, it's better than what I got. I won't even disclose what I got.
Oh, what do you got? I got made fun of once because I got Crown Royal as a gift, and I think that's still been sitting in there.
Crown's not bad.
No, it's not bad, but my team's a bunch of bourbon guys, so they don't look too kindly on the Crown Royals of the world.
Okay, got it. That I understand. I'm a bourbon guy too. So
what are you drinking now? What do you got? What do you got going?
Oh yeah, this is a gin Rickey.
Nice.
Yeah, it's not bad. Bartender's okay for a local guy. Now, Nucleus, you guys are based in Sarasota, Florida, correct?
That's correct. Well, we're actually spread out all over. I'm based in Sarasota, Florida. Our primary office is in Jacksonville, and we've got people all over the place. But yeah, I'm in Sarasota.
Nice. Yeah, I know we're in crazy times right now, but let's put COVID aside for a second.
Sure.
Tell me about the bars in the area. Where would you typically point someone from outside the area to visit?
Sure. So it really depends on what they like. You know, I definitely like to make sure that I know what people like before I point them in any direction, just because, I mean, we get a lot of tourists here. And so there are a lot of beach bars and tiki bars around. And so there are a whole bunch of those. There's some good ones, not so good ones and whatnot. But I know you kind of like dive bars. So if somebody really likes a dive bar, what I'll generally recommend, there's a really cool place called the Bahi Hut. It's basically this seedy little tiki bar that's inside of the parking lot of an even seedier hotel. And it's pretty sketch, but it's pretty cool because it's not this isn't why, but one of the things that's cool about it is it's known to have the strongest drinks basically in all of Sarasota County. So they actually have this Mai Tai that's pretty much like pure gasoline, and they actually limit it to 2 per customer because it's so strong and it's so big. And so we had some people that went there and tried to get them to give us more. We did have one member of our team who managed to get social engineer his way into a third one time.
There you go, man. That's where the social engineering skills come in.
That's right. That's why we do this, man.
Wow. So 2 per person. Like, did they make you sign a disclaimer when you get there, or they just know who you are and
they just know who you are? It's a pretty small place. I mean, it's in a parking lot. So, but it's like it's this crazy thing, man. It's been around since like 1950, and it's just like really, it's like this weird tiki hut thing that's inside of a building that's like in a parking lot. It's pretty crazy, and that's why I say, like, for you, I definitely would recommend going there. But if you're a tourist that likes beach bars and stuff, there's a whole bunch right on the beach that are pretty cool.
Nice, man. Any secret bars or speakeasies you know of?
Yeah, so I don't know of any private bars. There are a few places that are pretty cool that are private, but like there's a few speakeasy style bars that aren't necessarily secret ones on their own. But there's this really interesting one that I've never been to that I hear good things about that I'm still trying to find my way into. Sarasota is really big for the circus. So Barnum and Bailey and Ringling Circus is really big. We actually, that guy, Nick Willenda, that did the tightrope across the Grand Canyon.
Oh, yeah.
He lives in Venice, which is like right around Sarasota. So Sarasota Circus was a huge thing back in the day. And so there's still a really active circus performer scene. And so there's apparently this bar somewhere that only the circus performers can get into. So you have to be a verified circus performer or circus performer guest. And so I have a buddy that got in there once after a performance. I won't disclose his methods, sources and methods, but he managed to get in there and he said it was really, really cool. So if anybody knows how to get into the circus performers bar in Sarasota, feel free to find me on LinkedIn and tell me how to get there.
Yes. Shoot me a message also, because next time I'm down there, I want to see that. Oh, Scott, hold on 1 second.
Last call.
That's my bartender. He's yelling last call. You got time for one more?
I got time for one more.
Cool. If you opened a cybersecurity themed bar, what would the name be? And what would your signature drink be called?
Oh, man. Well, there's a ton of options here. I mean, first thoughts could be like, firewalls and fireballs or something like that. But I think if I had to pick one right off the top of my head, I'd probably go with SSH, shots, spirits, and happiness, or other H words, whatever floats your boat. But I think I'd probably go with that. So SSH would be my bar. My signature drink would probably be something called the Last Stand, which is a pretty sweet drink. I don't remember it off the top of my head. I know it's a really easy one to make. Okay. But that'd probably be my signature drink.
Nice. And are you going to build this in Sarasota or Jacksonville, or where are you thinking?
I think it would be pretty cool in Jacksonville. There's a bigger tech scene out there. So, obviously with SSH, you got to try to, that's pretty over the top nerdy. So I'm going to have to try to make sure that there's at least some computer geeks around.
SSH exit 22 off 95.
That'd be pretty funny. I should look into that.
What if you exit and then go through a tunnel?
See, I'm telling you, man, there's lots of options.
There's lots of options, man. I like it though. I like it.
Yeah. My first thought, this was a terrible thought. My first thought that popped in my head was actually something called the pop-up. And it'd be like a really, really crappy tiki hut that looks like it would get blown over in every hurricane. And I'd put it then, and it would be funny because you'd put it on the beach in Sarasota, and then every hurricane it would get blown down and you'd rebuild it just as crappy as the last time. And then the kicker is that there's a door with a big X on it. and you try to open it up and it just it routes you right back into the bar. So you can't get out. just like those old school pop-ups. That was my other thought, but I think I'd have to go with SSH.
Well, Scott, thanks for coming on the show, man. It was great having you provide your expertise on vulnerability management. Where can our listeners get in touch with you or find out more about Nucleus Security?
Oh, yeah, sure. So if you want to get in contact with me and learn more about Smokey the Bear and the differences between Smokey the Bear and firefighters, you can find me on LinkedIn. That's my primary method of social media communication these days. You can also find the Nucleus Ninja on Twitter. We have kind of a mascot called the Nucleus Ninja, but that's just at Nucleus Sec. So that's Nucleus SEC. And then from there, you can find our website. It's the same thing, just www.nucleussec.com. And we're always happy to do demos, anything else. We're not here to sell you stuff. We're here to, try to make, people happy, help them out. So if you have questions, even just about how to do vulnerability management, just let us know. We've been doing this for a long time, for better or worse. So we know our way around some vulnerability scanners if you want some suggestions on who to pick.
Cool, man. We appreciate you for that. Thanks, man. It was a great conversation. You take care and be safe.
You too, Chris. I'll talk to you soon, man.
Thanks, man.
See ya.
Barcode patrons, if you enjoyed this episode and want an easy way to support the podcast, please leave me a review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. If you're not on a Mac or iPhone, just visit thebarcodepodcast.com/reviews. I appreciate all the support. Cheers.
Unfortunately, it's time to shut the bar down for this episode. Thanks for stopping in. See you next time. We'll save you a seat. Be sure to check us out at thebarcodepodcast.com.